There is a moment, and every person who has ever stood at the altar knows this moment, when the world narrows down to a single heartbeat, when every choice you have ever made, every bridge you have ever burned, every scar you have chosen to carry instead of put down, comes rushing up to meet you all at once. That was the moment Daniel Whitmore was living in. Not the one the 300 guests inside expected. Not the kiss, not the vows. This moment, here in a dim corridor off the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel in downtown Toronto, with his hand on a brass door handle he could no longer bring himself to turn. 30 seconds ago, Daniel had been at the altar. The string quartet had been playing. His son, Oliver, had been sitting 3 rows back in a tiny bow tie, kneeling up on the pew to get a better view. And then, a hand, a grip, sudden and hard and purposeful, yanking him backward by the wrist like a rope thrown from a rescue boat. He hadn't even fully registered her face before he was in the hallway. Sylvia Hartwell, his boss of 4 years, a woman who had never, in all the time Daniel had known her, attended a single company social event. A woman who ran a $3 billion venture capital firm with the quiet authority of someone who never needed to raise her voice. She hadn't said a word. She simply held out the phone, and Daniel had stared at the screen for what felt like a geological age, long enough for his entire future to quietly rearrange itself into something unrecognizable. The woman in the image was wearing the black dress, the one she had told him was for her bachelorette dinner with the girls, the one she had come home in, smelling of wine and perfume, kissing his forehead before going upstairs to bed, the one he had waved goodbye to from the kitchen window. Sarah, his fiancée, his almost wife, the woman in the white dress standing 20 feet behind those doors right now. He had taken the phone. He had looked at it a second time because part of him was still hoping for a misunderstanding, a cousin, a colleague, a terrible coincidence of context. But the angle of the shot told a different story. The way their heads angled toward each other, the way her shoulder leaned into his arm, the way his hand rested not beside her, but on her. That kind of closeness isn't accidental. That's accumulated. That's familiar. Daniel handed the phone back. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the cool plaster wall and breathed through his nose. "I saw them go in together," Sylvia said. Her voice was flat, factual, the way she delivered a quarterly earnings report. "I was leaving a donor event at the same hotel. I waited 20 minutes. They didn't come back out." Daniel let the information settle over him the way cold water settles, not all at once, but in layers. He thought about the spreadsheet on Sarah's laptop, the wedding binder with every vendor's number color-coded, the way she had cried when Oliver handed him the ring box, the way she said yes before he had even finished the question. He had believed every single bit of it. He had met Sarah Cole 2 years after his divorce was finalized. He hadn't been looking. After Claire left, walked out when Oliver was barely 3 years old, said she wasn't built for motherhood, for marriage, for any of it, Daniel had sealed himself off. He had spent 3 years learning to braid Oliver's hair, learning the difference between a good enough packed lunch and a great one, learning how to explain, in terms a 6-year-old could hold, why some moms leave. He had told himself the 2 of them were enough. He had been starting to believe it.
Then Sarah had shown up at the school fundraiser with her brownies and her laugh and the easy way she had with Oliver, the way she called him Ollie from the first day, the way she knew his name from the hallway before Daniel ever introduced them. She was a 3rd-grade teacher. She had that specific patience that only comes from spending years with children who need steadiness more than anything else. She never pushed when Oliver had bad days. She turned up to his football matches. She sat in the cold on plastic bleachers and cheered like it mattered, because it did. Daniel had watched her and thought, this woman is real. This is what real looks like. He had proposed at Christmas. He had let Oliver carry the ring box, and Oliver had been so serious about it, so careful not to drop it, so proud of his role, that Daniel had nearly lost his composure before he even got down on one knee. Sarah had said yes before the sentence was finished. She was crying. Oliver was crying. Daniel was crying. His mother had phoned from Arizona that same evening and said she was proud of him for giving Oliver a real family again. He had felt, for the first time in a long time, like the story was heading somewhere good. "Why are you here?" Daniel finally asked. He heard his own voice come out thinner than intended, hollow. Sylvia's jaw tightened, the first fracture in her composure. For a long, charged second, something moved through her expression that Daniel had never seen there before. Not pity, not satisfaction, something that might, on another face, have been called pain. "Because you deserve better than walking into a marriage built on lies," she said. No drama, no elaboration, just the sentence landing like a fact. And Daniel, who had spent 18 months carefully, deliberately trusting again, Daniel exhaled. He went back in. He needed to look her in the eyes. He needed to hear her say it, or not say it, to his face. Every step down that aisle felt mechanical. The string quartet had started up again, trying to smooth over the interruption, and Daniel walked through the music like it was weather. His mother's hand reached out from the second row, and he didn't take it. Oliver sat perfectly still in his tuxedo, both small fists gripping the edge of the pew, watching his father with eyes that had already learned too much about how things can change without warning. He pulled her aside before they reached the altar. The whispers rose and settled as he led her through the side door and closed it behind them. The room smelled of cut flowers and white wine and some expensive perfume he would never be able to smell again without remembering this. Sarah turned to face him, her hands twisting together at her waist, and Daniel reached into his pocket and held up his phone. The photo filled the screen. He watched her face. He watched her go pale. He counted the seconds of silence. 5, 10, 15. She told him it was a mistake. She told him it was one night, that she'd been scared, that she'd run into someone from university at the restaurant after the other girls left, that it didn't mean anything. She said it with the desperate fluency of someone who had rehearsed it, at least in their head. And when the desperation didn't work, she reached for his hands. And when he took them back, she reached for his guilt. Think about Oliver. Think about the life we planned. Think about how happy we've been. He had looked at her and felt, and this was the part that frightened him most, nothing. No rage, no grief, just a vast gray emptiness where his future used to be.
Then the desperation curdled. She wiped her face and straightened her dress, and looked at him with something cold and hard in her eyes, and she said the words she had probably been carrying for a long time, waiting to use. She called him pathetic, said he had been looking for an excuse to run since the day they met, said he was too frightened of being hurt again to let anything good survive. And then she said the thing designed to do the most damage, that his ex-wife had been right to leave him, that no one would ever want to stay with someone so broken. She walked out before he could answer. Her shoulder brushed his arm on the way past. The announcement was made. Daniel didn't hear the exact words, but he heard the tone, apologetic, careful, the tone of someone trying to manage the descent of a situation that had already fallen. People were filing out. He could hear his mother's voice rising above the crowd. His phone buzzed constantly in his pocket. He didn't look at it. He sat in that small side room amid the scattered flowers and waited until he heard the last of the footsteps fade. And then he opened the door and went to find his son. Oliver was with Claire, Daniel's ex-wife, who had driven them to the venue and now, in the particular grace that sometimes appears between divorced people in a crisis, stood back and let Sylvia bring the boy to him. Daniel had expected Oliver to cry. Instead, Oliver climbed into his lap and said, "Is Sarah gone?" And when Daniel nodded, Oliver buried his face in his shoulder and went quiet. They sat like that for a long time. Then Oliver pulled back and looked at him. "I didn't really like her anyway," Oliver said, with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone who had been keeping a secret out of kindness. "She was nice,
But she wasn't real nice, you know? Claire drove them home. Nobody talked. Oliver fell asleep against the window somewhere around King Street. The city lights ran together in the rain, and Daniel watched them blur and thought about absolutely nothing, which was the only safe thing his mind could hold on to. Claire pulled into his driveway and put the car in park. She turned and studied him. He had expected judgment. They had always been slightly wary of each other, even now, even after years of managing co-parenting with something approaching civility. What she offered instead was a squeeze of his shoulder, brief, awkward, 16 years of complicated history condensed into a single gesture. Then she said, "Call me if you need anything," and she drove away. The house was enormous, with just the two of them in it. The living room coffee table was covered with gifts people had dropped off early, all that white paper and silver ribbon, all those carefully chosen things for a life that no longer existed in the shape he had imagined. Daniel walked to the kitchen and stood at the sink and drank a glass of water in the dark, looking out at the backyard. The swing set he had built for Oliver 2 summers ago sat empty in the rain. Sarah had talked about having another baby, a daughter. She said Oliver would be a wonderful big brother. Daniel had let himself picture it. He had let himself believe it was coming. He went upstairs and sat on the edge of Oliver's mattress. Oliver was lying on top of the covers, still dressed, staring at the ceiling the way Daniel had been staring at the backyard. "You okay, bud?" Daniel asked. Oliver turned to look at him. His eyes were dry and steady and far too old. "Are you sad?" Oliver asked. Daniel thought about lying. He thought about the reflexive parental instinct to smooth things over, to protect, to pretend that fathers exist above weather. But Oliver had had enough people pretend around him today. "Yeah," Daniel said, "I'm sad." Oliver nodded. Then he reached out and took his father's hand, small fingers, warm and sure. "It's okay to be sad, Dad," Oliver said. "You can't be happy all the time."
He changed out of the tuxedo and walked the 6 blocks in the rain. The cold felt right. He wanted to feel something concrete. He had texted her, 3 words, "You want to get a drink?" and immediately regretted it, and was about to send an apology when 3 dots appeared on his screen. Then her reply, "Where?" Sylvia Hartwell was already in the booth when he arrived, her whiskey half gone, her charcoal suit still perfectly intact, as if she had simply redirected herself from the wedding to this bar with the same precise efficiency she applied to everything. They sat in silence for 2 full minutes. He clocked it on the clock above the bar. Then Sylvia looked at him. "How's Oliver?" she asked. "Better than me," Daniel said. She didn't smile. She watched him with the same focused steadiness she brought to board meetings, and he thought, "This is the first honest conversation I have had all day." "You did the right thing," she said. He laughed. It came out bitter, wrong, like a note struck flat. He took a drink and felt the whiskey burn down his throat and was grateful for it. He told her what it felt like to be 41 years old and starting from zero again. He told her about Oliver, about the weeks the boy had spent practicing how to escort Sarah down the aisle, about the question Oliver had asked him the week before. "She's not going to leave like Mum did, right, Dad?" and about the promise he had made in response. He said something he hadn't said to anyone in years, something that crept out before he could stop it. "Maybe Claire was right. Maybe I'm broken. Maybe I don't know how to pick the right person." He heard the words out loud and hated how true they felt. Sylvia reached across the table and took his hand. The gesture was so unexpected that Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. In 4 years, he had never seen her willingly touch anyone, had watched her navigate charity galas and board dinners with the deft, deliberate body language of someone who maintained their perimeter absolutely. But here, in this dim bar on a Tuesday night in the rain, her hand closed over his, warm, solid, certain. "You are not broken," she said, each word measured and delivered like a verdict. "You are careful. There is a difference. You've spent 8 years earning that caution, and you have every right to it.
Claire left you with a 3-year-old. Sarah lied to your face the night before your wedding. Neither of those things happened because of some defect in you. They happened because people are selfish, and sometimes they hurt the ones who love them most. You'll find someone who loves you for real, she said. Her voice had shifted, quieter, almost gentle. Someone who sees how good you are, how hard you try. Someone who would never— She stopped. Her eyes widened very slightly. She pulled her hand back. She picked up her glass and took a long drink and looked away. The sentence just hung there, unfinished, in the air between them. Someone who would never what? Daniel asked. His heart was beating faster. He couldn't have said why. Sylvia set her glass down and met his eyes again. The mask was back. But something beneath it had shifted, the way a room shifts after an earthquake. Everything exactly where it was, but nothing quite the same. But they both knew that wasn't the end of the sentence.
They sat in a silence that comes after a door has been opened that neither person knew was there. The bar hummed around them, quiet conversations, glasses on wood, someone laughing at the far end of the room in the uncomplicated way of people whose evenings were going differently. Daniel looked at Sylvia Hartwell, looked at her, actually looked, the way you rarely look at someone you see every day, and saw her without the frame of CEO, without the $3 billion firm and the industry reputation and the charcoal suit. He saw a woman sitting across from him in a dim bar on a rainy Tuesday night, drinking whiskey she didn't need, trying very carefully not to say something she couldn't take back. He thought, I have been looking at her for 4 years and not seeing her at all. Sylvia, he started. He didn't know how to finish it. She shook her head once, sharp and quiet and clear. Don't, she said. Not angry, just careful. Not tonight. He nodded. He understood. Tonight was too raw, too compressed, too close to the wreckage. But something had opened, and now that it was open, now that he knew it was there, he understood that neither of them could quite close it again. Not really. She paid, he protested. She ignored him with the focused efficiency of someone used to ending discussions. They walked out into the cold together. She offered him a ride. He said he wanted to walk. She nodded and got into her car. Before she drove away, she rolled the window down. You're going to be okay, Daniel, she said. Not a comfort, a fact, delivered with the same precision she used for quarterly projections. He watched her taillights disappear around the corner onto Harborfront, and then he stood in the rain for a moment, letting it settle over him. He walked home. The streets were mostly empty, the honest, clean emptiness of a city after midnight, after the noise has moved indoors and left the pavements to the rain and the occasional dog walker and the people who need the solitude of movement to process what they've been through. He passed a flower stall, shuttered, a diner with its lights still on, 2 people in a window booth, a phone box that nobody used anymore. The ordinary world, continuing. He thought about Sarah. He thought about Claire. He thought about all the ways he had attempted to build something and watched it come apart in his hands. But then he thought about Oliver, lying in that bed in the dark, reaching out his small hand and saying, "It's okay to be sad. You can't be happy all the time." And he thought about Sylvia's hand closing over his at the bar table, warm and certain and unhurried. The way she had looked at him when she said he wasn't broken, the careful, unfinished sentence. He had started from zero before, the morning after Claire left, standing in the kitchen of a flat that felt like a museum exhibit of a life he no longer lived. He had figured it out. He had built something real out of the rubble, a boy who knew how to love, a life that was genuinely his. Perhaps starting from zero wasn't the disaster it felt like from the inside. Perhaps, sometimes, zero was the only honest place to start from. No lies, no pretending, no architecture of illusion to maintain. Just the truth, painful and clean and solid under his feet. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was in fact the only foundation worth building on. Daniel Whitmore walked home through the empty streets of his city, rain in his hair and whiskey in his chest, and something small and cautious and stubborn beginning, very quietly, in the dark, to feel like hope.
For more videos, please subscribe, like, and comment.
At Whispering Lens, every story whispers. Every whisper speaks to the soul. Please like, hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell.